So here you go. Ahoy, everyone. We're going to have a fun, not a fireside, because that would be dangerous on Zoom here. But this is an international triangle talk because we're all coming from different places, talking about the same thing, and that's jumping, not Olympic jumping or triple jumping, but taking the jump into entrepreneurship. So, Jennifer, why don't you start us off since you were first here in the Zoom? We'll talk with Sasha. I'll let everybody know who I am, and we'll have a free form triangle triage of what it means to jump into one of the scariest and most exciting things you will ever do.
Yeah, that sounds fine. Hello, everybody. My name is Jen Stirrup from the United Kingdom. It's my pleasure to be here today and just basically pick the brains of my two very friendly colleagues here. So it's my pleasure to be here. I've been running my own business for 11 years, and it's something I fell into. And it's something that I think it's not for everyone, and no doubt we'll come on to that. But I think it is an adventure every single day, and I love it. So with that, Sasha, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. I'm Sasha Kaczorzik. I'm the co-founder and COO here. Oh, I shouldn't be saying here. I'm the co-founder and COO at Pretact. We're a predictive maintenance startup based out of Canada and the US. We work with vehicles, well, usually heavy-duty vehicles such as trucks or buses, and helping fleets maintain the vehicle safety and reliability. I've been doing this for about 6 years, and I'd say entrepreneurship has some of the biggest highs and the biggest lows that you'll encounter. There's a lot of things that suck, and a lot of things that are great, and it can be a real roller coaster. But if you can hang in there and continue towards your visions and your goals, I'd say it's a really worthwhile experience.
I will agree. My name is Ryan Foland. I am a speaker, an author, and a ginger. The ginger part is the freckles and the light hair, and the used to be more red. Now it's not only losing its red, but it's also losing itself. But the one thing that I learned is to own who I am. And I classically tried to fake it before I made it, which was a big failure. And it was only until I realized the importance of sharing the journey along the way that I started to get traction as an entrepreneur. Jennifer, it sounds like you said that I know it was the accent. It sounded like you said you failed into it, which I know you meant you fell into it. And I thought that was an interesting sort of idea because I've sort of failed into entrepreneurship. I've had a lot of things that have not gone right, and I've just kept falling forward. So for me, again, I enjoy working with people to put the personal in their brand. And when it comes to corporations, I try to help corporations understand the importance of putting their people in front, because I truly think that people want to do business with people. And so I think that being human these days is the best thing that you can do when building your journey as an entrepreneur, because I don't think people care as much about your story of success. I believe that they care about how they see themselves in your story. And when you can relate to people along the way, people might get to know you, might actually like you. They might not like you, and that's okay. But if they do like you after getting to know you, then that builds trust, and trust is what essentially helps build businesses. So I'm excited to be here today as well. And it's an interesting international perspective. We're looking at a few different viewpoints, but I think we're all on that same internet, and we're all trying to find a way to navigate. So, if we open it up here, I guess maybe, Jennifer, if somebody is listening to this, how do you know whether or not you've become an entrepreneur? I think it's an interesting question as we talk about this leap. Is there a certain point where you are crowned an entrepreneur? Like, what in the world decides that, so that people have a reference point of maybe they are, maybe they aren't, or what does it take for them to get there?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And I also believe you can be entrepreneurial in a large organization, even if it's not your company. I tend to see it as a mindset where you are creative, you serve your customers, and you have a need. And also, what distinguishes you, I think, is the ability to innovate. and get people behind you as well. I think that it can be important to see what doesn't work for the market, what doesn't work for the business, and you have to keep an eye on that as well. So for me, I think being an entrepreneur isn't just about, raising lots of funds, or although that can be part of it. I think it's more of a mindset. And I love what you said about the authenticity piece, Ryan, because I think that's actually so important. And now when I think about it, I think I did fail into entrepreneurship. My story is that I was working for a large consulting firm, and they made team meetings at 7 o'clock in the evening. That didn't fit in with my role as a single mother. So I thought, how can I create a life for myself that helps me to fulfill my commitments, that helps me to be satisfied and create and innovate, because I'm already doing this for other organizations. So I guess I did fail into running my own business, because I thought, well, I can't be much worse off than where I am. I've got no job. I've got a mouth to feed and a mortgage to pay. But what can I do that makes me unique and different? So one of the best business decisions I ever made, I think, was dropping what was really dropping everything that did not bring a unique value to a business. And I think that's another point of entrepreneurship as well, is what is your unique value? Some of that is definitely tied into your authenticity, and it's also tied into what you give customers as well. Why do they come to you rather than someone else? So that's where I'm coming from. I wonder, Sasha, what your thoughts would be on the topic. What
Yeah,
makes an
so
entrepreneur?
I agree and disagree with you. Where I disagree is, and a lot of the things you say, I don't think make you an entrepreneur. They make you a successful entrepreneur. They aren't, there's a lot of learning along the way to go from, hey, I have a great idea, or hey, I'm doing something, to actually making it real. And I'd say, those are the skill sets that make you successful. Where I think, the two things I would say that make someone an entrepreneur, the first one is generally seeing something different. So being able to look at a field of opportunity or a way that people are doing things today, and see, what's necessarily wrong, or, what can be done differently that potentially makes sense. I think that is one of the biggest skill sets out there that really puts someone from an employee to an entrepreneur, at least in mindset. And I think that isn't solely relevant to entrepreneurship, but I think it is one of the biggest skill sets that makes someone an entrepreneur. The other one, I'd say, a tendency towards action. And I think this is where the difference you get between, a corporate innovative thinker or something like that. It's not about creating theoretical frameworks or writing white papers or doing stuff. It's about taking the opportunity you see, and putting action against it. I think those are probably the two biggest things that make an entrepreneur. And then there's a lot of noise around that on what type of entrepreneur you are. And you can go into the debates between, are you a startup entrepreneur? Are you a small business entrepreneur? Are you a entrepreneur who works for a corporation? They all have different skill sets and abilities and all that stuff. But I think those really just build on those two fundamentals. And then, as Jennifer highlighted, there's a lot of things out there that are required for you to be successful. Communication is probably one of the biggest ones, which I think is a key input element to getting people on your side. Making sure your messaging is clear and memorable, and concise too. Usually that helps a ton for people to remember what you're doing and get people aligned. And I think Ryan highlighted one, but I think that it transcends just working with people, and that is, authenticity and human element. The human element is everywhere, right? No matter what you're doing, from designing a product, software interactions, how it works, how it integrates in a workflow, how you're designing financial models and talking to the people relating to it, or when you're actually having those meetings and getting them aligned and selling the product, or selling the service. the human element is everywhere and is probably one of the most critical pieces. Without being able to get people bought in and aligned, you're not going to go anywhere. So I think it is probably one of the biggest key elements for success. And then Ryan?
Yeah, so I've got some good notes here, and I'm definitely agreeing. So we have a mindset, which is key to decide that you are an entrepreneur. It's something where you see things differently. I like that. You have a tendency towards action, because as an entrepreneur, you are wearing every hat possible and then making the hat rack to put that set of hats on. I can't agree more with communication, especially when it comes down to communicating that base idea. There's nothing worse than someone asking an entrepreneur a question around what the idea is, to only find out 10 to 15 minutes later of them talking that you're still confused as to what they're doing in the first place. So I think that we get excited about our idea and we don't remember that length doesn't equate to value. And so the longer it takes you to explain is actually inversely proportional to the value that you bring with how you're sharing. And then, I think that one thing I would add is the actual decision to claim that title. Now, whatever title you want, reminds me of a story where I was speaking in Ghana and I had the gentleman that picked me up and we had a good 45-minute talk. And the whole thing was revolved around how he wanted to be an entrepreneur, but he wasn't an entrepreneur. And so I let him talk and kind of led him into where I thought the conversation would go. And it peaked where I said, well, do you want to be an entrepreneur? Just an actual choice. Do you want to or not? And he said, well, absolutely, yes. And I looked at him and I said, well, guess what? I give you permission to be an entrepreneur. And his eyes just lit up and he's like, what do you mean? I said, nobody has to, it's you. Like, if you need someone to give you permission, then I will give you permission. But the title of entrepreneur is something that is a mindset. It's a mentality. It's looking at things differently. It's wanting to put in the work. And that was just such a special moment. And when I actually gave the talk, I asked everyone, how many people here want to be an entrepreneur, but you're not an entrepreneur yet? Raise your hand. And a whole bunch of people raised their hands. I said, I want you to, if you raise your hand, I want you to stand up. And everybody stood up. And I said, I give you permission to be an entrepreneur. And the whole place erupted. And it was just like, sometimes that's all you need is just the permission. This isn't some high bar that you have to jump over. And I think that's where taking the leap for me can start as a side hustle. So I'm curious your thoughts about a side hustle, because if you take the leap and you're like, all right, these meetings are at 7, it's either no job or figure something out, like that gets to the extreme where it's scary. But I think if you are excited about entrepreneurship, you can easily look at something to take the jump while you still have a safety tether, you still have your life jacket on. So talk to me about your thoughts on starting instead of like the full jump, maybe a little skip first, because I think a side hustle is a great way to play and learn how to be an entrepreneur in a controlled environment. So curious what you two think about that.
Yeah, so I think that goes into what type of entrepreneur you are. And as I mentioned before, you have the startup entrepreneur, you have the small business one, the side hustle one. They're all, they all are entrepreneurs, but how you approach it and how you go after things are differently. If you want to understand the process and do an experiment, I think it's a great way. And, entrepreneurship is all about doing experiments, failing fast, iterating and learning. So, I would agree with you that if you want to test the waters, is this right? Can you do this? Can you handle it? A side hustle could be a great way to test the waters and see if you like it or fail fast. And, building that mentality around, just getting the data, running an experiment. Did it work? Did it not work? Why? Questioning why, and how do you do better next time? If you want a next time, is all important. So I would very much say, agree with you that, if you wanted to test the waters, a side hustle would be a great way to, dip your toes in. Jennifer, you're muted.
Yeah, I think Sasha makes a great point. And my industry is actually artificial intelligence and business intelligence. So I deal all about the data. And I've been building very large technical estates for large enterprises all over the world. Now, I didn't intend when I made the leap really to think about it long term. I did that from a place of fear and a place of necessity. But I was very lucky to get one customer who really kept me going, basically. They became my bread and butter. And while that happened, I could build on my previous consulting experience. I was very lucky to build up a huge network on LinkedIn of happy previous customers. And because of that network, I think that helps me to develop a customer pool. So I think side hustles are important because they help you to develop that customer pool and that network. I don't think you can just dive in and say, right, I'm going to set up a business and you've no customers, you've done no investigation in who your customers might be. And that is a safe to fail way to start, I think, by having that side hustle. I guess I'm quite unusual in that I almost did it in the reverse way of what I'm recommending, which is I set up first. I got a customer straight away and they just took me on for a very small piece of work. And then they took me on for a larger piece of work. And then I was leading the whole team within 6 months. And then I delivered the project for a very well-known academic institution. And then that helps me to springboard. So I think developing your customer, if you can develop and understand your customer, who they are, then that will make you successful. And I guess that's my number one piece of advice for people wanting to make that leap into entrepreneurship. There's no point in building a business that makes chocolate teapots, right? You're not going to have an audience for that. So you have to find out and really keep listening to your customer. It's not something that ever ends. I sometimes, as part of my data science work, will ask customers, who's your most valuable customer? Who's most important to you? Is that people who give you the most turnover? Is it the customer that gives you more word of mouth recommendations, perhaps in social media, than anyone else? So actually, the questions themselves, when you pick them apart, become more interesting and more difficult to answer, I think. So I don't know what you think, Ryan. I think there's a big decision to be made, but sometimes the decision itself can be quite easy, but actually executing it can be really hard. And I wondered in your thoughts on that, Ryan.
I just wanted to jump in before Ryan said something, because I think there was a similarity between what Ryan said and Jennifer said on knowing your customer and knowing what you're doing. And really the alignment there is knowing your customer's problem and being able to summarize it in a single sentence. If you can't do that, I'd say you need to know what you're doing more, need to know your customer more. Just have a crystal clear message of why should they care? What are you actually doing and how does it align with their interests? Ryan?
You are speaking my language, buddy. I actually have had a unique opportunity of working with a lot of early stage entrepreneurs. I was brought on to the University of California, Irvine to help start their first ever undergraduate entrepreneurship program. And so imagine a campus with 30,000 students. For the first time, now they have a centralized place where they can go and explore what it means to be an entrepreneur. And there's nothing more early stage than a college student with a big idea, with no money, with just more excitement than the average bear. And so I found myself sitting and talking with these individuals, but there was one common thread. And it was when I asked them, so tell me about your idea. They would just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And it got to a point where, just from the center standpoint, I didn't have enough quality time for any of the consulting because they would spend the majority of the time talking about their idea. And so I decided to approach it with a smaller set of questions. And I'd say, before you tell me your idea, can you tell me the problem that you solve? And then I'll guess maybe what your idea is. Then they would just tell me what their idea was. No, wait, stop. Don't tell me what your idea is. Tell me the problem that you're solving. Well, what do you mean? Okay, that's where we're going to start. And so the three questions that I would end up just trying to get answers to was, what is the problem that you're solving? What is your solution? And who is your market? And those three questions they're so deceivingly difficult to answer because we think we know, but when we have to articulate it, is very hard to keep it into one sentence. And I actually developed a method, something that I speak on all over the world, called the 3-1-3. And as a process, it helps an entrepreneur narrow down and focus on how to explain what they do in 3 sentences, in 1 sentence, and 3 words. And just that process of distillation is so important because it forces you to make those decisions. And on this topic of the market, it's one of my favorite things to talk about, because I'll ask people, can you tell me your market in just 1 sentence without using the E word or the A word? And they get confused. They say, don't worry about it. I'll let you know if you get the A word or the E word. And then I'll grab this little buzzer that I have and I'll watch them and I'll just wait for it. And then as soon as they say the A or the E, let's try it again. Now, do you guys think you can guess what the A word or the E word is that I do not allow when it comes to explaining your market?
I'm guessing the A word is and.
No.
Really?
You got the first 2 letters of it correct. Okay, I see. This is where it's fun. Selfishly, I love this kind of stuff. It's the word everyone and anyone, because I swear to you, so many people, I'll ask them, what's your target market? And they'll say, well, anyone who has a blank, or everybody that has a blank, or everybody here, or just 1% of 1/10 of 1% of all of these people. And it just drives me crazy because that's not your target market. If you are for everyone, you are for no one. And the easier thing to do is default to like, oh, I'm going to help all people that are in this category. And so my next question is along the lines of, well, how many people could you actually close? Like, how many people could you actually handle right now as your own business? And usually the number is in, say, the hundreds. So, okay, well, if I had people lined up, your ideal clients, 10 of them, and I sat them in a room with you independently and you could talk with them, how many people could you close? And some people are aggressive and say 7 or 8 out of 10. And I do a quick math and I say, okay, take your closing ratio and let's multiply that to figure out how many clients you need to get in front of to get to that. And usually it's such a small number that many people are within a mile radius of them. So again, we just think that we need to cater to this huge market. And I think that's one of the biggest early mistakes. So if you're listening and you explain your idea, do not use the A word, anyone, or the E word, everyone, and you will be that much closer to identifying who actually needs the solution that you have. Those are my thoughts on that.
So I agree with you on this, like at a high level. A solution for everyone is a solution for no one. Where there's one small thing you said that I somewhat disagree with, and that is you don't need to have that large potential. And I think that really goes into knowing what type of entrepreneur you want to be. If you're finding a small business or like a side hustle entrepreneur, who really cares if you're going after that $1 billion market? If you're going for that venture-backed, massively scalable type of idea, you need the vision and the pathway of how that moves from that small market, staying very similar to much larger markets, or being able to find a pain that is uniform amongst a much larger segment. And part of it is knowing yourself and knowing what you want at the beginning and why you're going into it. And going into it the wrong way at the beginning is just going to haunt you down the road. It'll create a misalignment, and I'm not going to say you will fail, but you'll have a lot of headaches and need to restructure and reevaluate what you're doing, which can be very, very painful. Especially if you've built a team on one hypothesis, aligning them with one thing, and now you're telling them, hey, look, everything needs to change. So I would say know what you want, or know where you want to go, as close to the get-go as possible.
Yeah, and I love that pushback, and curious to hear Jennifer's thoughts on it. I find that people forget the difference between the target market and the market potential. And I think the mistake comes that when somebody, whether it's an investor or a possible customer, when they're asking for who is your target, who is that ideal customer, that beachhead customer, the people who are going to the early adopters, the people that will actually pay you and not stand on the sidelines to see if everybody else ends up buying it. I think that that target market is so important to be able to identify. I agree that there's a secondary understanding of this larger vision and potential, but I find that especially when you're starting, knowing how to articulate that beachhead that could lead to the other is something important.
Yeah, so I completely
So
agree. You know, start with the people who will say yes,
there you go.
right? And you go there and you grow. But it's, you know, make sure that the vision or the target is much bigger than the people who initially say yes, if that is what you're looking for,
Yeah.
and having that story around growth.
Yeah, I think
All right.
it's coming back to what Ryan said initially about authenticity. And part of that is knowing who you serve and who you're going to serve well. So I actually love the idea of the E and the E. I think that's great because actually I think a lot of people I speak to can't articulate that very well. And I think that's a great tool for helping people to think about it, especially when you're dealing with entrepreneurs who are so excited about their idea. They want to use a cliche, boil the ocean, and they want to have this huge customer pool and they're going to take over the world. Where that comes into authenticity, I think, is knowing who you serve. But it's also making sure that you stay very true to what you're saying to customers. I'll give you an example of a Theranos. You've probably seen the example in the United States at the moment. Elizabeth Holmes is the young female founder, and people really wanted to believe what she was saying, and they did, without much evidence and without much questioning. Partly that was down, I think, to her passion, because she was so articulate about what she wanted to do, and it gave people warm, fuzzy feelings because they were helping healthcare and helping soldiers and everything else. But I think knowing who you serve really helps to make sure that when you give a good account of yourself, that you've been authentic and that you are not perhaps exaggerating in any way. I do think there is that tendency for people to confuse or exaggerate when they've got a business idea. And actually, I don't like that. I think it starts to give off a bit of a smell in some ways. And I think that's what happened with Theranos. She was actually caught by the Food and Drugs Administration, who started to say that the company were not fulfilling their regulations. And I think ultimately, you don't want to try to fake it before you make it. I believe in things like integrity. I believe in inclusion, bringing people along that journey. And if I don't know something, in AI, you can't know everything. It's such a huge area I'm in at the moment. But what I can say is either I will find out, or I will know someone who can help us to solve that problem together. Let's look at that problem. And that's where collaboration comes in. But you can't do any of those things unless you're really authentic. And part of that is knowing, who do you serve? You know, who are you helping? So I don't know, Ryan, what you think about that.
Yeah, I think the transition is natural to talk about community because especially as an early stage entrepreneur, the community that you build, the relationships that you make, the networking that you do is so crucial and it's just not something that you can skip. I was at an entrepreneurship conference and there was, your rock star panel, and I don't remember who they were, but I remember the last question that somebody asked, and it was, what is the best piece of advice that you can give an entrepreneur? And all the panelists look at each other like, who's going to take this hot pocket, right? And the person who took it said, look, went back to the person and said, excuse me, how many lines does it take? I'm sorry, how many dots does it take to make a line? And everybody was super like, wait, the panelist just asked this person a question? Yeah, how many dots does it take to make a line? And the person was like, I don't know. Like, he just wouldn't answer. He said, 2. Mathematically speaking, it takes two dots that becomes a line. Think of entrepreneurship as a series of dots. And when you think about that, you look at each individual moment as building upon what you've had, but it stops at that point. So the best advice I can give you as an entrepreneur is to look at this as a series of dots, but be responsible for the next dot. So, Jen and Sasha, this is a dot in our path right here. But guess what? If we never tweet each other again, if we never connect on LinkedIn, we never have a meaningful conversation, if it never goes anywhere, this is just a dot and it stays a dot. So I want to remind people that every opportunity, take the responsibility to connect the appropriate dots. And I would not be here if it wasn't for the dots in my network, the nodes that I've built. And so I'd be curious your thoughts on how important community is and how important networking is and how important your fellow entrepreneurs are in this journey. Because I think I wouldn't be here without those dots.
I would say, 1,001%. It's a team sport, for the lack of better words or phrases. Everything you said is fully true there. The only thing I would add to it is don't be afraid to ask for help. People appreciate it. Entrepreneurship is this odd world where you can ask a lot of people for help, even if you have them in a pedestal, and for some reason they give you time and help you, if they see it meaningful. Which goes back to a lot of the stuff that was said earlier, just clear, concise messaging. What is the problem? Why is it significant? And you'd be surprised at the people who will shoot you out, like they give you an email response and advice or hop on a call. Yeah.
Jennifer, what do you think? And then after your answer, we do have some questions that have been thrown in there. And so we can do a little back and forth chit chat to answer those. But your thoughts on community networking as a big piece of this puzzle?
I think it's a huge piece. I think there's two aspects to it. I think one is really positive. So it's been my absolute pleasure to interact with you both, and I'm following you both in Twitter, connected in LinkedIn, and I'll either stalk you relentlessly in LinkedIn because I spend far too much time in that, and I'll learn from your posts and I'll say hi now and again. But I hope that this will lead to more meaningful engagements. I've learned so much from you in this really short space of time. I think there's a negative aspect to community. I think that you kind of define yourself by the network that you have, and if you are associated with people who are not behaving well, then you have a decision to make. And I think it's good to have a very big network, but it's also important to have a meaningful and purposeful network of people who are like you. And I know I sometimes disconnect with people in LinkedIn. I unfollow them on Twitter because I see them behaving badly towards other people. And they might think that's just a one-off hit, that it doesn't matter. But they forget people see how you behave with other people. And that can be a secondary impact on how personable and almost how much of a magnet you are as an entrepreneur. Because I stay back from some people because I think, I don't like how they treated that person. I'm not validating that, and I just want to step back. So yeah, I do think network is really important, but it can also say a lot about you, who you network with, and make great choices about who you network with. So with that, Ryan, would you like to read out the questions?
Sure, I'll be the question frisbee thrower. I will say that I love your answer because one of the biggest challenges that you'll have is if you go into business with someone who is on a different page. And of the businesses that have burned and crashed and failed, I can trace that back to a real difference between the people that I've worked with. And so, yes, it is a series of dots to connect, but I love this idea that it's just as important to remember who to not associate with or who to end those relationships with, because you realize that it's not the right fit. So more is not always better. And I like that as I wish I could go back and not pursue some of the relationships that I did knowing what I know now. So I think it's important to have those. All right. So let's see. We've got a number of questions and not much time left. So maybe I can propose more of a rapid fire where we each give our 30-second spiel, and based on the questions, that'll bring us back. And that way we all get to participate. So Sasha, starting with you, does social media really work to sell products?
I mean, it can, but it's slow. You have to build a brand, and it requires continuously repeated discipline. Requires discipline to continuously post and do that. And it helps, just going back to one thing that Ryan said, being authentic in your posting. The engagement is significantly higher.
Jennifer, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it helps you to underline your existing connections with existing customers. So I follow all my customers online from a business account. If I see that they are celebrating something, I'll, comment and just engage more deeply than I may do otherwise. So today I wished one of my customers, their CEO, a happy birthday because it's his birthday today. So it's just like it gives you a chance to be a person and be human and authentic online. Because if I saw him in person today, I'd be like, hey, happy birthday, elbow bump, And it just gives me those chance to create those interactions and not doing it as a way to make extra money. It's not that. It's about saying, hey, I appreciate you, and I'm thinking of you today. So,
Yeah, I share sentiments on both of those. I don't think that social media on the larger scale always works. I think that we might look at influencers and think, oh my gosh, if she just decides to unleash this new product on Instagram, she makes millions of dollars. Well, there's a reason for that because there's a huge backstory and there's a lot of dots that have connected to get them there. I think that social media can work to sell products if you have a realistic outlook on what that is and you're not the boy or girl or person who's crying wolf. And I just think that you have to be calculated. If all you're doing is trying to sell, then you're going to come across as like somebody who's just being aggressive and that you're not listening or participating. So one piece of advice that I got is, I believe it was Mark Schaefer who wrote Content Inc. And I love his concept. It's called the 411 theory. Now it's initially around Twitter, but I think it applies across the board. And the idea is that for every 5 pieces of content that you create, one can be from somebody else, another one can be from somebody else, something can be another retweet from somebody else, and then at least create one piece of original content. And when you do that, let's say for every 4 pieces of content, 3 of them that you curate, 1 of them that you make, then you can make an ask. So the concept is give, ask. And so if you're not giving and all you're doing is asking, then you're not going to get what you might be after, which is to sell products. So make sure that you're giving, and at the right time, you can make the ask. Like for me, I'm diving into this world of NFTs. And what's interesting is that the NFT platforms have no algorithms. So no one who's searching for no one who's finding it organically. And all of a sudden, it's like this purest moment, like, okay, anyone who's going to see it, I have to drive them there. So do I just say, go see my NFTs, go see my NFTs, go see my NFTs? No, I'm building awareness. I'm showing that I just read a book on NFTs. So I'm sharing that. I'm trying to start the conversation around it. And when the timing's right, then I'll ask people to buy. So, all right, back to the top here, Sasha. How do you succeed in pitching to angel investors?
So, Ryan, I actually think you somewhat answered this question in what you just said. It's one of the best ways of doing this is, help adding value to them. And so, giving them, if there's an angel community or know people who invest, show them that you know what's happening in the industry and introduce them to other startups that might interest them. And by doing that, you create a value add that seems like you know what you're doing. The other rule of thumb for early stage investing, and it's not just angel investors, I'd say early stage VCs as well. When you ask for help, they will look to give you money. When you ask for money, they'll look to give you help. I mean, it's not 100% true, but that's a general way that lots of people look at it. If they see, you are looking for help, looking for improvement, and you're willing to listen, that is usually a huge plus in most of their books.
yeah, I just think it's a give get. So when I speak to investors, they're very interested in my network, and they'll sometimes, in terms of communication, they will communicate with me, and then they will ask me, what do you think of this or that? And for me, what they come for is my market experience, my industry experience. I know someone who they might want to speak to, that kind of thing. And I think it's a give get, absolutely. It touches on what Ryan said earlier, actually, about the content. It's the same with angels as well. You can't just go in and ask them for a ton of money. I saw someone recently on Twitter complaining that one of the investors hadn't followed the process properly, and it was a personal rather than a professional reason that they hadn't been invested in. And I thought, hang on a minute, it was maybe a very professional reason that they didn't invest in you, but now you're venting your spleen about it on Twitter. They're probably really relieved that they never went near you. And what that says to me is coming back to the point you made earlier. It's people see how you behave with other people. And I thought, I'm snapping back from that person, because what they should have done is congratulate the winners and leave it at that. Well done, everyone. Hopefully, we'll be more successful next time. And thank everyone for their time. Be polite, courtesy costs you nothing. So, with that, Ryan, do you want to read out the next question? I'm conscious of time. I'll just let you pick one.
Yeah, absolutely. And my quick answer to that is don't underestimate the jockey, right? There's this idea of the jockey and the horse. The horse is the business, the jockey is you. Too many people I see focus on the horse. They're like, this is my business. Don't forget they're looking at you as the jockey as just as important. Okay, so let's see. We talked about a question is around advice starting out. What would that look like? Would you start locally or nationally? I think we covered that earlier about the idea of having a nice target market, but an idea of where your extended market or your global market might be. So we've got a question around how to advertise a product or service, and or how to get an idea or concept to start a business. So we can play with those two for this one. How would you advertise a product, and then how would you come up with maybe an idea for that product to merge those two together?
Yeah, so I guess I'm starting again on this. For early stage, I wouldn't advertise. Like, it is, find people, talk to them. Advertising is going to be a waste of money until you have the ability to actually have something out there to fulfill the need. So, marketing is great. Marketing early stage is to figure out who you should be talking to, but you should be taking the active actions to talk to them. You just cut the idea of inbound sales for like an early idea out. Just don't do it. It probably won't be successful. How do you get an idea for a concept? Look at the world around you. What doesn't make sense? Ask yourself why, and see if there's an opportunity there. Or what's difficult, what's annoying. It's a great source for finding opportunity.
Yeah, I'm a terrible person to ask this question, because I never advertise, and I've been in business for 11 years. I just never do it. I'd probably take the risky approach of word of mouth. And the thing with that is you don't really know what people are saying about you, but they still keep coming back. So it can be terrible. So I think it's all about serving your customer. If you serve your customer and you have a good network, your customer speaks to other people in their network, and they say things like, hey, you should speak to Jen about that. And I have lots of virtual coffees. So it's probably something I could improve upon as an advertising strategy. But it's like you said earlier, it's the jockey. People are half about the business, half about you. How can you help them? What problems can you solve for them? What value can you bring? So I'm sorry I can't answer that. Mine is all about integrity, deliver, deliver, deliver for your customers. And they will talk about you without you asking, actually. I'm incredibly blessed to have wonderful customers. And if any of them are listening, I can't thank you enough for what you do for me, for my confidence, and for giving me the opportunity to serve you. I spoke at a conference actually a few weeks ago, my first in-person conference after COVID, and 4 of my customers turned up without telling me in order to support me. And that they turned up in the session. I was blown away, and I was almost in tears because I was overwhelmed that they had done that. And it's all about the people. If you knock yourself out and deliver for them, return it in spades.
Awesome. So we've got one question left here. And the question, I think, which Jennifer, you almost just answered, is what has been your most satisfying moment in business? So while you think about that, there was one particular question for me about how you connect dots in the various stages of business. And I'll make it simple. At each stage in your business, depending on what you need, those are the relationships that you'd build. So when you're right out the gates, you don't necessarily need to build, that first relationship with the investor, get some traction first. So as you're building the dots, have that reflect your growth. But Sasha, final answer here. What for you has been the most satisfying moment in business as an entrepreneur?
First time the customer pays you. Honestly, it is like, so I wasn't as lucky as Jennifer of starting off my business with someone paying me. It was finding a problem and building a product, but getting to the point where the first time you get a check from the customer for a product, it's like, hey, I actually built something that people enjoy. This is awesome.
And Jennifer, you kind of answered it slightly in your last answer, around your just gratitude towards customers, but what stands out as something that's super satisfying in what you do?
And I presented with one of my customers at an international conference. I wasn't sure if they were going to do it until the morning of the event. And even then, they just sat in the front row and they said, Jennifer, you can do it. And then just as I was about to start, one of them stood up and said, can I have a microphone? I'll just do it. So then someone else stood up. Well, she's going up, I'm going up. So yes, okay, here's 2 microphones. And all I did was introduce myself. And I asked them, well, what impacts did this have in your organization? And that was it. I didn't get a word in after that. But that was fine because I'd helped these people grow in their confidence. And I gave them the opportunity to talk about their achievements, having gone from not knowing this technology and a lot of nerves to suddenly up on a stage internationally in a video that was being filmed and beamed everywhere, talking about their achievements. And I found that personally satisfying, even though I didn't say a word. So I thought, I've helped those people with a professional achievement they would not have had otherwise. And it was all down to them, and I should say they were brilliant. They were absolutely brilliant. So that, for me, brings a smile to my face.
Well, it's no surprise that it has to do with the customer, because I feel like in the short time that I've known you, the value that you bring to customers is more than a problem solved. It sounds like you're really building relationships. For me, the most exciting thing is when I get a referral, because it shows that the person that I've worked with who've paid me, they want to share what I'm able to do with other people. And it's just the gift that keeps giving. And to some extent, it's the reason why I don't do any outbound marketing. I just create content and I work with clients, and then it sort of has just created its own life. And so I think that for me, I just get excited when I get to meet new people who are excited to work with me because other people were excited to work with me. So again, there's no perfect science when it comes to taking the leap. But if you've learned anything today, and hopefully you have, it's about falling or failing into entrepreneurship. But the decision is yours, because a lot of it is a mindset. And that mindset is something that nobody has to give you permission. It's something that you take. And if you want to start to feel more entrepreneurial, then see things differently. Look at things in an innovative way. Practice your communication. There's nothing harder than soft skills. We can all identify that if you can't communicate, you can't get people along with you in the journey. Have a tendency towards activity. Make sure that you get good at making decisions. And at the end of the day, whatever you choose, don't forget that you're dealing with other humans. So your ups and your downs, don't feel like you have to hide your downs and only put your ups on the table. When you're able to be real and authentic and share your journey, that's when people see themselves in your journey. So on behalf of everyone, this has been fun to get to know you, and just a conversation, a global conversation here. And I think we could talk for a few hours, but we're going to cut it short, and let's consider this one dot. So for everybody listening, it's your responsibility to create that next dot. Give us a follow, drop us a DM, find us on your favorite platform, and just start the conversation, because who knows, we might be somebody who can help you along the way. And I think based on everybody's answers here, we're always looking for more people in our communities. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Sasha. It's great. We'll talk to you soon. We'll see you online.
Thanks. Have a good one all.
Thank you. Bye.